Good afternoon. This is a full room. Wow. Yes. Thanks for joining me. We're going to go on a journey here through Visual Studio 2015 and look at some of the new web developer features that we've got for you guys. My name is Mads Christensen, and it's been my privilege to work on the web parts of Visual Studio for some years now. And we have some great news for you all. So we're going to take a look at all that. If you have any questions as we go along, please just raise your hand. I'll repeat the question so that people can hear it in the overflow rooms and online. And I will also leave a few minutes at the end for additional questions. So I'm on Twitter, a great place to ask questions as well, or comments or feedback or whatever. So we're going to look at a few new things that we have. Package managers. So we have NuGet. We've had NuGet for years. And we are introducing two new ones, and we're looking at why that is and how to use them. We're also including support for task runners, not something that we've had in Visual Studio before. And these task runners helps us run tasks that we use for our client-side development, such as bundling and minifying JavaScript files, compiling TypeScript or CoffeeScript or Less or Sass, those sort of tasks. And then we have some new features. I'm going to kind of go through all of them as I go along. There will be new features here and there and spread everywhere, and so we're going to get to them all through the demo here. And I'm going to be using a lot of extensions. So I will comment on them. These are extensions that are really, really good for web developers, and some of them are just good in general. And at the end, I will have a slide so you can maybe take a picture or whatever and see these are the extensions that I was using. So, clicker, here we go. Here are the package managers that we are shipping in Visual Studio 2015. The first one is Bower. We're going to be using Bower for client-side packages. Okay? So JavaScript, CSS frameworks, and so on. Up until now, we've been using NuGet to bring in jQuery, for instance. But in ASP.NET 5, NuGet can no longer bring content into your project. Okay? We are still going to use NuGet for all the DLL files and assemblies that we consume, all the .NET stuff. That's not changing. We're actually building NuGet into the ASP.NET runtime itself. So NuGet is still very, very important. But when it comes to client-side packages, we're going to look to Bower. We're going to do that for a few reasons. Bower is a huge ecosystem. Thousands and thousands of developers out there in the world are using Bower. So that means that a lot of packages exist on Bower that does not exist on NuGet. Let's take AngularJS as an example. When the AngularJS team releases a new version of Angular, they put it on Bower. They don't put it on NuGet. Either we do that, or some of you guys do that. Okay? But it's always a little behind. It doesn't have everything. But with Bower, we can now bring in everything that sort of is out there in the world. So that's really exciting. The next one is NPM. So this is the Node Package Manager. And sort of rule of thumb, we use that for bringing in tooling. So that's kind of weird, right? Visual Studio is tooling. Why do we need to bring in tooling? Well, we use it to bring in, for instance, Task Runner. So I was mentioning that. But what it means is that we can bring in tooling that works cross-platform, and that we can isolate the version of the tooling specifically to this one project that we're working on. So our compilers, how we compile TypeScript or Less or CoffeeScript or Sass or what it could be, those versions of those compilers are specific to our project now. So that means I can start a new project with a newer version of some of these tools, and it doesn't conflict with my other projects. So I can isolate that. And that's really good, because that's sort of what we're doing with .NET Core. You can ship .NET Core as part of your app so that you can run side-by-side various different versions of .NET on the same machine without any problems in isolation. And now you can do that with some of the tooling as well. NPM can also be used for client-side packages. But rule of thumb, we're probably going to be using it most for tooling. And that tooling could be task runners like Grunt and Gulp. And what's really cool about Grunt and Gulp is that they are they have a huge ecosystem. So when we're talking about we want to have a task done, let's say we want to compile CoffeeScript. It could be whatever, but let's just say that. There are already compilers out there. Right? All that tool already exists for as I mentioned, CoffeeScript compiling, bundling, minification, and so on. So there's a huge ecosystem with a lot of packages available for us that we can use to stitch our client-side tooling using. And so that's really, really nice that we now bring in a huge ecosystem into Visual Studio. An ecosystem that has usually been like either you use Visual Studio or else you probably use these, but you don't use them together. It's been kind of two separate worlds. But now it's the same. So when you install Visual Studio, come on, clicker. Oh, yeah, let's take this. The goals. So what are the goals for this? Because all these tools are actually Node.js based. Okay? They run on Node.js. So the goals for this was to make them first-class citizens. They have to be completely integrated into Visual Studio. So you'll see we have integration into Solution Explorer. We have new Task Runner Explorer windows in Visual Studio. And it all feels natural. If it runs on Node, but you don't have to know that. You don't have to care about that. It should feel like you're in Visual Studio, and Visual Studio takes care of business, and it does. So that was super important. It's also very important that there's no Visual Studio specifics to what we're doing. All these tools, everyone out there that uses them today, almost everyone, is using the command line to invoke and run tasks and install packages and all this sort of stuff. And you can still do that, and we want it to be in a way that Visual Studio doesn't add anything specific that only makes it work with Visual Studio, or that you have to modify these tools a little bit so that they light up in Visual Studio. The goal was that it has to be the exact same things that a team member of yours sitting on a Mac in Sublime Text using the command line, the exact same commands, the exact same thing should happen when it's run through Visual Studio. So that was the first thing we've tried to figure out, can we do that? And if we couldn't, then we wouldn't do this. But we figured it out. So that's good. It's also important that it's extendable. So we ship we have 2 new package managers. We have 2 new task runners. There might be a third one out there. There might be older ones that you want to bring in and have a better experience. That's all extendable. So you can do that. And then finally, it has to be optional. If you don't want to use this, you don't have to. It's not like your client-side workflow is going to collapse. There's no other way. Simply just delete the files. Nothing is written to the Windows registry or anything like that. Nothing is polluted by removing some of this stuff. So the Visual Studio installer. How many people here installed the Visual Studio 2015 RC? Hands up. Okay. How many here have installed any other version of Visual Studio 2015, an earlier preview or something? Okay. So maybe 20% have tried it. So you might have noticed when you install Visual Studio and you get that little window up with a lot of checkboxes where you check off which tools you want. The only one that is pre-selected for you is web development, because the web is sort of everywhere now. Whether it's a Cordova app or like a Windows app or whatever, all relies on web technologies. But when you check that box, or if you leave it checked, rather, you get a few things installed. I'm not sure this thing works that well. Try it over here. So Node.exe is put into the Visual Studio install path. Right? So it installs Node.exe, which is the Node.js runner. So you get that. You get the Node Package Manager, NPM is installed for you. Bower, Grunt CLI. So Grunt is one of the 2 task runners that we have support for, and it needs a specific CLI tool, so that's installed as well. And finally, Git. So what's happening is that inside the Visual Studio installed directory, so C:program files, Visual Studio 14, blah, 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 somewhere in there, you'll find these components. That means that Visual Studio uses, by default, what is shipped with Visual Studio. Now, if any of these components receive an update, let's say there's a new version of Bower being released, but there's 2 months till the next update to Visual Studio is released. How can you then update Bower and have Visual Studio do that? We have added support for that in the RC, so you can now control exactly what versions of any of these things that you want to run. But you can override basically Visual Studio's default. So that's very important. It's detached. Right? We're not trying to force like specific versions of any of these tools on you. So that's how that works. And demo. Any questions, by the way, so far? Yes, hand over here. There's no support for IO.js for running the tooling, no. If you want to run, you can run, I think, the Node tools for VS. If you want to write a Node application, I believe that can run IO.js, but Visual Studio, as just for the use of tooling, cannot. And no NVM stuff? I don't know. Let's talk afterwards. Yeah, I can find that out. Okay, so here's a very, very empty website. This is an ASP.NET 5 website, but there's not really anything in it. It's very, very empty. So for those of you who saw Jeff Fritz, he did the introduction to ASP.NET 5, or if you've looked at ASP.NET 5 before, you might have seen the notion of a folder called root. This is where we put all our static files into. Images, CSS, JavaScript, static HTML. And that's sort of the root of the web server. And we can call it whatever we want. By default, we call it root. It's all controlled by project JSON, which is, it's not web config. It's something different. But we use it for a lot of the same things that we would use web config for. One of them is this new thing, which is configuring, like, what should we call this folder that we want static files in? Some people like to call it root. Some want to call it public or dist, whatever it might be. But what we can do is that we can just get rid of it completely and say the root of my project should be the root of my website. And to do that, we just hit dot, like that. And we see here the icon on root now changed. And we can just delete it. So that means that the root of my project is now the root of my web server, basically. So this is what we're used to. I just want to call this out because I don't think we normally demo that you can remove the root folder. So for those of you who have been wondering about that, you totally can do that. So this is a file new empty project, and there's nothing in it. And I think we should build a website. So let's add a new file. So I'm just hitting Shift F2, and that gives me this little, maybe not so pretty dialog box. So let's create index.html. This is an extension called add new file. So it gives us an HTML, right, HTML5, ignite, and let's just add a header, an H1, ignite, and let's run it. So this is now a static website. Really, really simple, as you would expect, I assume. And what I want to do is I want to make this look a little bit prettier. And so we can use, we can write our own CSS, or we can use a framework out there, and I want to use Bootstrap. But you remember, NuGet no longer brings in client-side packages to my project. For that, I want to use Bower. So how does Bower work? Well, we can use the command line, but we don't have to. I'm just going to add a new file. So I can do that, right-click here, add new item, search for Bower. And we have all the templates available. But I'm just going to do Shift F2 because I can no longer add files to any project without this extension. So that just gives us an empty JSON file. And check this out. You get full IntelliSense for the JSON file. So that's pretty nice. And we see here name is bolded because it's required. So let's just call it ignite. And now we want to add dependencies. So Bootstrap. Notice here how I don't even type the quotes. Like this. We get the version. This is live IntelliSense coming from Bower.io. Right? This is the equivalent of searching for NuGet packages on in the NuGet dialog, for instance. But right here in the editor, really nice. And we can get the versions, we can get a little description of what does these weird things mean. I always go with it without like this. So the only thing I have to do for Bootstrap, this specific version of Bootstrap, to be installed into my project is to save, like that. And so, right here, something is happening, right? It's already done. We saw the package manager log. Something happened. And now we have dependencies up here. It says Bower. And we have Bootstrap. And Bootstrap depends on jQuery, so we also get jQuery. And it looks like this. So in the file system, we now have a folder called Bower Components. And it's a flat hierarchy. Every Bower component is its own folder. And we can see here we have Bootstrap, and we have a lot of stuff in here, probably more than we actually want. What we want is what's in the dist folder. We want these 3 folders. That's what we want in our project. But notice how Visual Studio did not add Bower components to our project. It is in our project physically. It is in that same folder as our project, but we don't show it. You could totally use it out of Bower components folder. You can use the CSS framework. But what I like to do is I like to take just the files that I need and copy them into a library folder in my project. Keeps things nice and clean. But I don't want to do that manually, right? Because then I update my packages, I get a new version of Bootstrap, and I have to copy things over, and I want to automate these things. So because it's something that I want automated on the client side, I can use a task runner. So I can use either Grunt or Gulp out of the box. Okay? They do the same thing, but in different ways. Grunt was the first one. Gulp came on a little later on and had a different approach on how to automate client-side tasks. So let's use Gulp. In order to use Gulp, Gulp is tooling, right? I have to bring in the tooling. I have to install the tooling into my project. This is sort of new. We haven't really done that before. So let's install Gulp. For that, we're not going to use Bower or NuGet. We're just going to use NPM. Right? That was the rule of thumb. If it's tooling, we use NPM. And just like we have Bower.json or we have packages.config for NuGet, NPM uses package.json. So, if I can spell it right, package.json. This looks very similar. So this one has 2 required ones, a name, and it doesn't matter what you write here. Version. And here, instead of doing dependencies, I'm doing dev dependencies. Because these are for development time only, right? It doesn't really matter unless you build a Node application, but we're not building a Node application. I'm not bringing Node into my project. If I want to build an ASP.NET project, it's not being polluted by Node. You don't ship the Node runtime. It has nothing to do with your app, okay? It just so happened that the tooling code, which is written in JavaScript and executed by Node, lives in a folder under your project. So here I'm going to get Gulp. Do this. That's the latest version. And I do the same thing. How do I install this? I save the file like this. And something is moving around down here. And a little bit of action is happening over here. And so this is being brought down from the internet, unless you've got it cached. And that means that now the tooling is there. I have to create the code that executes the task that I want. We now just have the task runner framework, but we don't have any of the task logic yet. So for that, I'm going to add a file called gulpfile.js. And that's just the name of it. It just happens to, there's like the naming convention of Gulp. It has to be called gulpfile.js. Or if it was Grunt, it's called gruntfile.js. So this might seem like a lot of work to add all these files, but you do it once. Okay? You do it once. And everything we do after this is we just add another line. After this, it's simple. So now I have gulp file. I could have said add new item and chosen gulp file, and we have like scaffolded everything for you. I like to use just this approach here, and I have a snippet. So Web Essentials gives us a snippet called gulp that does this. So the first line, we're actually coding Node right now. Okay, this is actually Node. But we don't have to care about that. It's just JavaScript. So we require gulp. That means we bring it in, we import it. It's our using statement. Think of that from C#, right? Using gulp. And gulp is located right here, right after we saved package.json and installed it into node modules. And again, node modules does not show up over here. We just show npm, we have gulp, and we can see its dependencies. Right? We kind of keep that out of the way. So let's create a task that copies. So that's what I want to do. I want to copy my Bootstrap files into my project. So gulp dot, and check out, we got like full IntelliSense here. Even though this is actually executed by Node exe, the JavaScript editor, we've modified it to give you IntelliSense for everything for gulp here. So we can say gulp source. So what are the source files I need? And look here, you get really nice IntelliSense. We say, well, I want, so dot means the root, the same folder as my gulp file, the file I'm working in right now. So find the Bower components. Something is wrong here. Like this, right? Bower components. Bootstrap. So I remember where this is. And then dot dot. So we can do globbing patterns. If you've done any PowerShell before, for instance, you're familiar with this type of syntax. So basically what I'm saying is anything inside the dist folder under the Bower Components Bootstrap is what I want. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to pipe that. So again, PowerShell, we're dealing with piping here. Everything in gulp are streams. So I'm basically having a file stream that I did with gulp source, and I'm going to pipe that stream to sort of the output. Where do I want to copy this to? I'm going to use gulp.dest. That's just the destination stream here. And we just say lib, which does not exist, bootstrap, and save this file. Okay? And now we have a new window here called Task Runner Explorer. Notice how the copy task just shows up. So let's just run this. 8.6 milliseconds. And now we have lib, bootstrap, and we have the content here. So now all this stuff is in my project. Oh, and by the way, you get this file nesting is on by default now. So that's kind of nice. So that was pretty simple. And we can now take advantage of this. So let's go into our index page here and add lib. So lib, what was bootstrap? Let's take the min file here. Like that. And then we should just add a little bit of bootstrap markup, a little bit of a few class names. So that's how bootstrap works if you haven't played around with that yet. We modify our HTML with class names that bootstrap understands. So one thing I want to do is I want to wrap my content in a div with the class name container. So what we've added now is a way to very easily do that, to surround something with a tag. So for those of you who use Sublime Text, you might be familiar with the shortcut key Alt-Shift-W. And it adds a div around whatever is selected. I just hit space, and now I can say class equals, and check this. You actually have like the nice Bootstrap icon here, so now we can very easily identify that this came from Bootstrap. This came from a framework that's not it's not my code. It's not my CSS, it's someone else's. So let's give that container and page header like this. Let's just save it. And let's run it. And now this looks a lot better, right? So we have this page header adds like a little bit of styling for us here. So now even people like me can do relatively pretty web design. I'm very thankful to Bootstrap for that. Yeah. Okay, so now we have our skeleton up and running. But of course, I don't want to use just Bootstrap. I want to use some of my own styling too. I want to customize this website. So I want to add my own style sheet. But what I want to do instead is I want to use less. So less is this superset of CSS. Any CSS file is a valid less file, but we get a few extra features on top of that. Sort of like JavaScript and TypeScript. Okay? And less compiles down to CSS. So let's add some less files here. Again, Shift F2. And this time I want to create a folder called less, and in there I want to put my files. So less, and then just /. Let's let's create variables.less, okay, like this. So that gives us this file. Now I can do something as fantastic as create a variable called background, which this is a color, so let's just give it like green. Like this, save it. And I want to have another less file, so let's do site.less. Okay, so that just gets included next to this file here. And let's start by importing my variables file here. So background, color, and now if I do add, we can see I get IntelliSense flowing in from my imported less files, right? And it even tells me, like, what's the value of this variable? Or if I hover it, it will show me the value as well. So that's really nice. You could do like this. And that's all fine. The problem I have now is the browsers do not understand less. So we have to compile less into CSS. And there have been a lot of ways to do that. There still is. Like you could use, some people might use Web Essentials, the extension to do that. That works at design time in Visual Studio only. Without Web Essentials, it does not work, or you can't work with teams with a mixed setup, so that's problematic. No CI server support. There are runtime versions of this where you, like ASP.NET has a handler that transforms less into CSS at runtime. That's really cool, but I prefer to do it statically in a way that also works on CI servers. What's really cool about that is exactly how the node-based tools work, like Gulp. So let's get the Gulp less compiler and compile my less into CSS. So let me just install it. So now we have Gulp. Now I'm going to install a task. So think about MS Build, right? You have tasks. And so you can either write your own, because it's just JavaScript, or you can install, you can download some from somewhere. And in this case, we're going to download them from NPM. So Gulp less, and save the file. Right? And just by saving it, we install it, and it all happens in the background. Where is it? So node. We now have Gulp less. Okay, so let's get it in here. So less equals require this, and look, you get IntelliSense for this. So Web Essentials gives us a little extra IntelliSense by looking at our node modules folder and figuring out, oh, there's something called Gulp less. Let's have IntelliSense for that. And then Gulp task, get a snippet again, Web Essentials to the rescue. Makes it real easy to do this. Let's call it less. And so we're going to find our less file. So what is it that we want to compile here? We have two less files. I only want to compile the one called site.less. It might use stuff, as we saw, I brought in the variable from variables.less. But the less compiler is so smart that if I just compile site.less, it will resolve all the references, all the imports, and compile that just fine. So I'm just going to say site.less, and I want to pipe that, and I'm going to pipe that into my less function that I required up here. So less. So look at this, you get like nice IntelliSense for the less task here. So that's nice. But look, check out what we have here. Let's see. Like this. So we actually have IntelliSense now for object literals in Visual Studio in the JavaScript editor. Check that. This is really impressive. So we actually get, for this specific task in Gulp, we get IntelliSense for the parameters that we can send to it. And I want to send the compress parameter here, compress to true. I'm going to minify the output here. Okay? So remove all the white space, make it ready for production. And I'm just going to pipe that to any destination. That could be my www root if I had that. But in this case, I'm just going to put it right back in the less folder. And what it does is that it will automatically just call it site, but it will rename it to .css. So let's save that. And we now have our less task. So now when we run this, we have to do the right thing, of course, this. So that's the whole thing. We have to pipe it to like a file stream, and that's what Gulp dest helps us with. So let's run this again. 12 milliseconds, and now we have site.css, and it's all minified. So what happened here was I had two files that it compiled into one, and it minified it. This is the easiest way to do bundling and minification. Right? You get it all, it runs through Gulp, and we solve both the bundling and minification and the less compilation just in those few lines of code. And so if I change the background here, variables less, let's change it to red. Save the file, I can just run my less task again. And now we should get a notification. The CSS file changed. Do you want to update it? Yes. So now it's red. So that's really nice. Obviously, the problem here is that this is not necessarily a good workflow, that you make a change and you have to go back and run something manually. You want to have it done so when you save a less file, it recompiles immediately, right? And so what's really nice about Gulp is that we get that all built in. So we can go down here and write a Gulp task called watch. And I can say Gulp dot, and again, super nice IntelliSense here, Gulp watch. So I can set up a file system watcher. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. So I'm going to watch some files, and I'm going to watch for less and then star.less. So any less file in the less folder, right? When any of them changes, I want to execute a task. And I can execute one or more. So we have an array of task names here. So I want to run the less task. That's this one. Okay? Oh, it was that one. So that means any change to a less file, run the less compiler. So now if we go, I have to start this. So let's run the watch task. It just starts up, and it does not die. Okay? It just always runs. And so now when I make a change to Dodger Blue, CSS file has changed. Do you want to reload it? Yep. And here we go. Right. So now I get that workflow, that very, very nice workflow that I'm used to if I used Web Essentials perhaps to do this before. There's a question? I was getting to that. So I will not answer the question. I will show you the answer instead. Is that better? Okay. No, let me just take it. Yeah, so what do? The workflow is, of course, you open Visual Studio, you open the project. Let's say you restart your machine or whatever. You open Visual Studio and you open your project. Do you then have to manually start this watch task every time? No. We can have Visual Studio do that for us. So let's right-click the watch task, go to Bindings, and bind it to Project Open. Like this. And then in the top of my Gulp file, we add a little comment here. VS adds a comment. Okay. So that answers your question. So what happens here is that if you're not on Visual Studio, you just have a comment. No one cares. But Visual Studio sees this comment and makes sense of it and will act on it. So that's really nice. Actually, I also want to do one thing with my less task here. I want to do so when I hit Control-Shift-B and I build my project. I wanted to run my less compiler, just because. And so we can do the exact same thing. Right-click, Bindings, and after build, or before build. If I do it before build, what happens is that if my task, my less compiler, doesn't succeed because I had a syntax error or whatever, the rest of my build stops, like my C# compiling or whatnot stops there. But I can do it after build. That means I always want to build my C#, and if my less compiler doesn't succeed, well, at least I have my C#. So let's do that. And let's just save. So now we have this. I'm just going to save the file. And now, let me just stop this running task here. Just do this, and now the process stopped. But if I hit Control-Shift-B, we can see that the less task ran, and we're up and running here. So that's really nice. One thing that we usually see is that we can make these compound tasks, so that's kind of nice. So Gulp task, and we call it default. That's sort of just a standard name. That means that we actually don't need any of this stuff. The only thing I want is when I call the default task, I want it to run the copy command, the copy task. Oh, there we go. And less, like this. So after this updates, we can run default, which runs copy and less, like this. We can even do it so that watch, before it actually starts watching, it also just executes the less task just before, so we're good to go. So we can sort of orchestrate these things and mix and match and make it really, really simple to do. And what's really cool about this, even though that we do write that comment in there, there is nothing here that does not work on the command line. So if you're concerned about that, if you want to sit in Sublime Text because you don't like Visual Studio for whatever reason, you can still work on the same project, no problem. So let me show you what that looks like. Let's just open a command prompt here. Alt space. So this extension is called Open Command Line. Not very creative name, but it's called Open Command Line. Alt space, it opens it to my project. And I can now write exactly what Visual Studio executes. Gulp default, for instance. That's the one we just ran. Right? That looks exactly the same as what we just saw. Right? And Visual Studio now updates the less file because we were just doing that. I can even do the gulp that, run just the watch task. So if I go here and I change this to blue, whatever, I save the file, the watch task still runs, but it runs from the console now, the command line, not from Visual Studio. But the same thing happens because it is the same thing. So let's just close this. All right, so let's go back here, and let's add our this file right here, and we should have a beautiful blue background. Yikes! Let's just stick with the Dodger blue there. That's a little more pleasant. Not much, but a little more. Okay, so now we have our custom styling set up. We have a good workflow here. I save something, it just happens automatically. I feel happy as a developer and productive, right? Very important. I'm going to close this CSS file. It's becoming annoying. There we go. Okay, so let's add Angular to this. So again, I'm just going to add Angular. Go to my Bower file. Angular. And sometimes it takes a little while for it to find the version number right here. So that's the latest version. And I can go to my gulp file. And I remember exactly what this is because I did rehearse a little bit before I came here. So every file starting with Angular dot and then either JS or map. Okay? Because, see here, Angular. So I only want the ones that ends in JS or map for source map. And so now let's run the copy task. I'm moving that into lib Angular. So that's now right here. And this took like 13 milliseconds instead, right? This is actually really, really fast. So now we have Angular. So let's just add that here. Take the min file. So that's kind of nice. So one of the things we do when we do Angular is, depending on how we wire things up, is that we add an attribute. ng-app. Notice here you get like really nice IntelliSense for Angular right here in the HTML editor. And now what it means is now I'm bootstrapping my Angular app, is what they call it. So now I can start doing some of that. So what I want to do is I want to write a input text box that when I type in there, I have a data bound to an element. So we have some data binding going on. So let's do that. And let's take advantage of Bootstrap as well. So I'm going to do div class jumbo and input group. These are all coming in from Bootstrap. So here's my input field, class form control. Okay. So let's just see what that looks like. Yeah, very pretty. Really what I want is I want this to be like more like a full screen experience. And I also want a little icon inside. A little icon inside the text area to make it like more pretty. And we can use Bootstrap for that. So I'm just going to add a little span here, give it a class, and it's called an add-on. Input group add-on. And inside that, I want to add an icon. So what's really cool about Bootstrap and other frameworks like Bootstrap is that they come with pictures and icons, basically. So we can do I and then class equals glyph icon. Okay. So that just kind of sets it up. Now I need to choose which icon do I want to use. I'll check this out. Look here, in IntelliSense. Ooh. Yeah. Right? So I just want this one. Yeah, you like that, huh? That's pretty cool. So now we have our icon, right? So that's right here. So that's very, very nice. So this is an extension that shows the Bootstrap icons. That's called Glyph Friends. And it was written last week. It was finished last week by a member of a community called Ryan Williams. And he actually contacted us about like 3-4 months ago. He wanted to do this, but there were issues in the extensibility of Visual Studio. But we heard about this, like, yeah, that is a really, really good idea. So let's fix up the extensibility story to add another API so you can do this. And so he did this, and you get the same experience as you just saw for Bootstrap with all the icons. You get that for Foundation, Ico Moon, Octocon, Ionic icons, and there's one more. Font Awesome. Font Awesome. Right? So a lot of frameworks, and we can add more. All open source. All right, but let's get to the Angular stuff here. So I'm going to write an Angular model. I'm just going to make something up. I'm just going to call it text. It doesn't really matter. And this model name, I'm going to use that from, let's write a block code from the template syntax right here. Text. So this one maps to this one, okay? There's no JavaScript here other than what Angular comes by default. So here's my block quote. So now if I type something, right, you get the data binding here. So this is a really, really nice workflow I've just done here. I get great help for my CSS, Bootstrap, and for setting Angular up with Bower, automating things, compiling less, and bundling and minifying. And I have not yet used the command line for any of this, and it's Node behind the scene that does this. This all runs in what I would say a pretty normal Visual Studio workflow. It's pretty, you can keep your muscle memory intact here, basically. There's a question, yep. We have support for what? Is there support for live reload? So live reload is again, it's a Node module that we can use to automatically reload the browsers when a change happens in CSS or an HTML file. Yes, because that has nothing to do with Visual Studio. Again, it's just the command line. Anything you can execute from the command line using grunt or gulp or whatever will work here too. BrowserLink is our version of that, where you don't have to install anything. In the RC, we still have a few hiccups. We're not done yet. We have to rewrite a lot of it for the new ASP.NET 5 stack. And it will come, but you will actually get even better than a live reload, because as you type CSS, it updates the browser. You don't have to even save the file as you type. Really cool. But that's for BrowserLink, and but you can use live reload. You can use browser sync, which is another one of those. Yes, down here.
You exclude the Bower components folder somewhere.
Yeah. So do we exclude the Bower components folder? Because now we have a few extra. We have node modules and Bower components here. Do we exclude those? Yeah, you can do that if you want to. I would do that. Some people think, oh, it's a good idea to have at least a backup of those folders in case that Bower is down, or in the solution it will still show up. So if you delete these two files or folders and you open the project, Visual Studio will just restore them. Okay? Yep.
Continuous integration.
Say it again.
Continuous integration. So how is that?
Yes. So how is this going to work with continuous integration? It works super well. The only thing you need on your CI server is to install Node.js, which is simple, just run an MSI installer, and you're good to go. Everything here is command line. So if you use MS-Build to orchestrate what happens, if you use Nant or Make or Sake or whatever, you can do this. It's just command line things that you execute. There was one over here. Yeah. So the question is, can we do like a dev and a production version of this? So if I run in production, I want bundling and minification of JavaScript. But if I run on my dev box, I don't want that. Yes, you can definitely do that. So for instance, Let me actually show you how I can do it. You can do that very easily. Again, this is just JavaScript. You can put any logic that you can express in JavaScript, you can put in here. But I can have one that's called less. I can call it less prod for production because I have compress equals true. I can create another one called less dev, and that's the one that my watcher listens to. Right? So because watching, file system watcher, it's development time only. Right? So I can completely set this up as I want, and I can execute any of these tasks separately. One that I execute on a CI server or a test server or whatever, and one that I execute in the dev environment. Okay, one more, and then we continue on. Over here. How about what support? How about knockout support? So yes, so the knockout support that we introduced in Visual Studio 2012 Update 2, which gives you complete IntelliSense for your bindings if you have set the references up correctly. We had an issue with that in previous versions of like the preview bits for Visual Studio 2015. It's all fixed in RC, so you get that. All right. I'll leave more room for questions. You have a lot of questions. It's great. Okay, so we continue now with a new thing that we've added. So I'm just going to add a new component here, a new package. So let's add React.js. Anyone here have been playing around with React.js? Yeah? And you've been really, really frustrated that when you try to do that in Visual Studio, it like dies on you? Yeah, that's kind of not a good idea. So what we can do is that we can install React.js just like any other client-side package here. And when we do that, we also want to go in here, and we do the same little trick here. It's really fast. So React, this. And let's just execute the copy task. So now we have React.js. Again, this nice file nesting. I love it. Okay, so when we're dealing with custom JavaScript that we want to write, you have probably noticed this weird looking file called _references.js. Right? We don't need it, but it really helps out the Visual Studio JavaScript IntelliSense engine if we do. So let's just add one here. I'm just going to put it in my lib folder. It doesn't matter where it lives. It used to be that the _references file had to be in a folder called scripts. Okay? And the reason why we always use scripts was because NuGet was very opinionated. It needed a folder called scripts. Otherwise, it didn't really work. And that was sort of annoying if you don't want to call your folder scripts. But now you can put _references anywhere you want. So let's just put it in here. So _references.js. Here. So I can just right-click it, either in Solution Explorer or inside the file. We say update JavaScript references. And it automatically just puts all my JavaScript in here. But notice how it does not put them, it doesn't look into my node modules or Bower components folder, because I've moved things out, so I don't need that. So let's just remove this one. We can move this one up. So ordering could matter here, because as you might know, Visual Studio is probably the only editor out there JavaScript editor, that actually executes your code in order to provide IntelliSense. So it uses IE11's JavaScript engine called Chakra to basically compile and run your JavaScript. And that's how it knows what properties hangs off of each object that you've got. So, but just as in on our website, ordering of files matter. So you want jQuery before any jQuery plugin, right? Otherwise it breaks. So this is more resilient, but we can help it out by doing this. We can even set it up by saying auto-sync JavaScript references. So now when I just add a JavaScript file or remove one, this updates automatically. So that's kind of nice. So let's do that. And then let's add a JSX file. So this is React.js. React.js is using something called JSX, so JavaScript X, and that's because that's sort of an XML syntax they put into JavaScript. So believe it or not, they figured out how to make another thing on top of JavaScript that needs to compile to JavaScript. But this is actually gaining so much popularity. It was the top voted feature on user voice for Visual Studio. So that's why we've like, okay, let's build this support. And so it is very, very early in the RC actually, but let's just create alert.jsx. So here it is. It's an empty file. So let's see, what does this look like? So var alert equals react dot, and check this out. We get like nice IntelliSense for React. React create class here, like this. And then I have a snippet here called ren for render. We can do this. And now we get like the IntelliSense here, or the syntax highlighting showing up. It is still early, so what's going to happen is the first time you try this in Visual Studio 2015 RC, you're going to get a little dialog box that says, you know, it's still a little rough, but we're working on it. Okay? So the thing about adding stuff like support for stuff like this, where you can see it's sort of the reverse logic that we're used to. We used to have HTML, an HTML file that has a script tag, and inside there we can put JavaScript. This is the opposite. This is a JavaScript file where we can put HTML into. Okay? And you see we're not perfect. We do have a little squiggly here, a little syntax error. It says this is not a syntax error. It's just the tooling is not up to speed yet. It will be for RTM. This has already been fixed, but it didn't make it into RC. So now we can do stuff like, oh yeah, we can say, like, can we? No. Okay, so let's do this.props dot message. So I'm now accessing properties on my class, alert class here that does not exist. So let's just do those. So I'm going to use RRC, another snippet. It looks like this. Oh. And we can add the property message equals, you know, hello ignite, like this. So now for the first time we do have a JSX editor. I'm really, really happy about this since it was the #1 voted for feature by you guys. So I hope that you're going to enjoy it. We are aiming to unblock the one of you that wants to try it. We know that this is not a perfect thing in RC, but at least now you can try it without like being really frustrated at Visual Studio. And in RC or in RTM, I promise this will be amazing. But the reason we got this IntelliSense, when I hit dot up here, right? The reason I got this was because I added that _references.js file. And we're doing some new things here with IntelliSense in general, both for JavaScript but also for JSON, because you saw this before, how you got IntelliSense for all this stuff right here. Right? But it's not just IntelliSense. It's more than that. It's also, it knows what type is it. This is of type string. It has a description. Here's an array or an object. Right? There's more than just the name here. And so what we're doing is that we're moving things over to schemastore.org. Okay? So this is an open source website. And all the schemas that define IntelliSense for JSON are all on there. So Visual Studio Code, the new editor that's out there, is using schemastore.org as well to bring in IntelliSense. And validation. And you might be new to JSON schema. It's sort of what XSD is to XML, but it's not as painful, like, at all. Here's what Schemastore does. What's really cool is that I've been showing you some extensions, right? But there are other ways to extend Visual Studio than writing extensions. One of them is add stuff to schemastore.org. It's all on GitHub. It's all open source. Anyone is invited, or everyone is invited. And you see here, we already have like a good number of stuff. Composer, that's for PHP. It has nothing to do with us, but this is a global schema store where the entire world, hopefully, will participate in, so we can have better tooling everywhere. But we're doing that for JavaScript as well. So this is brand new. That's why there's not as many. But one of them is React.js, and we have Gulp. So I showed you we had Gulp file IntelliSense. That comes from here. That comes from this project on GitHub, schemastore.org. We're going to move our CSS at some point, not that long from now, hopefully, and HTML. Everything that makes up the validation and IntelliSense are going to be open source. Everyone is invited to help out, update them as new browsers come out, new things are supported, and so on. And hopefully we can share this out so that maybe other editors will use the same stuff. That would be cool. But the idea is here to just make it better for everyone, and this is the way to do it. Yes?
So if IntelliSense is pulling all this from an online store, let's say you're on the airplane,
Yeah.
And how is it going to perform IntelliSense then?
So what if we were on an airplane with no internet access? Then how does it pull this stuff down? Well, it used to be that Web Essentials, the extension, pulled stuff down from schemastore.org. This is now built into VS. And the first time you open Visual Studio JSON file, it will populate everything. And then it will keep it up to date, keep all the files up to date. It will simply just suck it down, but it won't have all these schemas by default. So you have to have internet connection at least once to get it down, right? If you have Web Essentials, so the JavaScript parts is coming down through Web Essentials. So JSON comes down through Visual Studio. If you have Web Essentials, you get the JavaScript files, which just light up IntelliSense for you. And if you just install Web Essentials, and again, the first time is it the first time? Yeah. You have to be online once, and then it pulls down these things as well. So that's the key. And we're going to see more and more stuff move over to be like service-based, so that we can rev them very, very quickly out of band. We don't have to wait for a Visual Studio update, and everyone's invited to help out. So I'm really excited about that. Okay. Let's take a look at Schema Store. This is Visual Studio 2013. How many people here are on Visual Studio 2013? Whoa. Okay. So that's like 75% of you, if not more. So all the stuff I showed you was for 2015, right? Well, I have the Task Runner Explorer right here. This is a free extension. It's called Task Runner Explorer. I'm really bad at naming extensions, I think. Their name is just basically what they do. So you get that right here, and we can execute the task. Just double-click them. We can even bind them. So this is sort of an early version of what is now in 2015. But we decided last summer to put it out on the gallery for free, so you can take that into 2013 and use it. So you can use this today if you can't upgrade. And this one is using Grunt. And Grunt is sort of the other one, Grunt and Gulp. And they're sort of similar. This is different, though, a little bit different, the way that it is structured. But I just want to demonstrate that we have equal support for both. It doesn't matter which one. The support here is equal. And you can use this today already. There is an extension here called Package IntelliSense that's really nice. It gives us that notion when we save Bower.json or Package.json, it will automatically install our packages. When we open a project that we just cloned from GitHub, it will restore the packages that's needed, Bower components and node modules. So that will get you going today and start getting you familiarized with these things. But it's a great start. The support for all this stuff in 2015 is miles ahead of what this is, but it's a really, really good start if you want to get started. Question? Yeah, that's a great question. So what's going to happen going forward when we have NuGet packages that contains both server components and client packages like SignalR? It ships a JavaScript component and a DLL file. That will not work. So Damien and Fowler, who builds SignalR, are trying to figure out how that story goes. It could be that you need a NuGet package for the DLL and a Bower component for the framework, for the JavaScript part, basically. So that will work today, but it's no longer one entity. Yeah. All right. So I have a website. It's called webtooling.visualstudio.com. So this is one we're working on. We want to showcase like what's all the cool stuff in Visual Studio, and this is sort of following best practices, CSS3 animations, and like all sorts of cool stuff. And of course, you can like click the edit button down on bottom of every page, takes you to GitHub, and you can basically just hit the edit this file and send a pull request this way. You don't even have to do anything; just do it directly in here. Now we like this so much that we thought, hey, let's just make this like a thing that everyone can use. So we use it to document our features, but you might want to have something similar like this, like a content management system based on GitHub that takes community contributions. Right? So you can totally fork this and redesign it to your own needs. And I have it right here. So here we go. Notice how the watch task just started running immediately right here. Right? That was what I was talking about before. So I use Gulp here, and all these things are Markdown pages, right? All the content is written in Markdown. That's really, really nice. So let's actually just run this. So it runs locally. This is you can open this in Visual Studio 2013. It's a website project. And so, and 12, I think. It will work in 2012, which makes it really nice. So it runs easily. And because it's all done in Markdown, we have a kind of a nice Markdown editor now. So Web Essentials ships Markdown editor. We have updated that for 2015, so it now runs on like a lot, both faster and has more features. And so some of the features that we've been adding is support for syntax highlighting. So let's say I want to write a piece of code that I want to share on GitHub, my README MD or whatever. Let's say it's C#. I can just write it like this. So this is how GitHub works, right? You can write code like this. And now if I start typing in here, I get IntelliSense. Right? How cool is this? Directly inside the Markdown editor, we get full C# IntelliSense here, colorization from Roslyn. If I save it, automatically we can see the syntax highlighting happens over here. This is a really, really great experience for writing Markdown. So we got that one now. It starts in Web Essentials. We'll move it into Visual Studio at some point, but that's kind of nice. And it supports like CSS and JavaScript and other things as well. So a really nice addition. More than that, a little bit of colorization in GitHub, or sorry, gitignore files, or YAML. So if you don't know what YAML is, it's sort of the same as JSON, and we can use that for configuration in a lot of scenarios. So we already have providers for ASP.NET 5 that lets you configure everything in YAML files. It's similar. It solves sort of the same problems as JSON, but it's easy to read. And so we have a very nice editor for that called YAML Editor. Again, a great name for an extension. We need to, I don't know what's up with these names, but so that's really nice. And then I just want to show you this. I don't know if you've seen the PowerShell tools of Visual Studio. If you open a PowerShell file, it will ask you to download them. We now have a full fidelity PowerShell debugging and colorization and IntelliSense and all that sort of stuff in Visual Studio as a third-party extension. So that's nice. Yay, PowerShell. So I've been asked the question a lot, what about ECMAScript 6? Anyone here using ECMAScript 6? A few hands. Isn't it the same as JavaScript? Yes, it's just a newer version of the ECMAScript standard. Yeah. So let's just look at some JS stuff. So here, we do have some features now, and that's kind of nice. So let's just make an array. Right? Doesn't really matter. Like this. So the map function, this is sort of a way for us to filter an array. It looks like this normally. All right, so return x plus 1. Okay, so that's how we would write it today. In Visual Studio 2015, we can now use fat arrows. Or just arrows, but they're called fat arrows. Looks familiar? This is a lambda, isn't it? Yeah. So this is really nice. So this is coming to JavaScript, and we have support for it in Visual Studio here. Makes everything a little bit cleaner and more expressive, and that's really nice. So fat arrows, we have template strings. You know, let's do a string here. Hello, ignite, and then we can do something like this. You know, and then some variable. If I had a variable called test or whatever, I can put it in here. So template strings are in. We have classes. We have, to some extent, modules. And we're going to add more and more ECMAScript 6. And so this is just a little taste of what that is. Some great updates. What's really cool as well, JS.comments. So another very nice thing to do. And let me just show you some of that stuff, by the way. So this is the schema store from before. If we look at the JavaScript. These are the JavaScript files I was showing you, how we get IntelliSense in. Let's look at React. See, we now have support for JS.comments for the first time in Visual Studio, which is really, really nice. What this means is that, so all libraries out there, most libraries out there use JS.comments in their files, and that now flows through into the IntelliSense engine. So even for the JavaScript IntelliSense, where we don't have the files on schemastore.org, if the author of the library already included js.comments like this, it will just light up in Visual Studio. So that means if you want to start doing that, annotate your code with comments like this, your coworkers that's going to consume your code is going to be much, much happier. That's nice. Cool. So let's go over here. All right. So we're moving on. So this is the list of extensions that I was showing you. There's a few that I did not show you, like Image Optimizer and Multi-Editing. Image Optimizer is one that you cannot live without. It will significantly reduce the size of your images without hurting quality. It will simply strip out stuff that's not needed from the image. It doesn't resize it, it just strips out stuff that's not needed. So you want to use that one. Multi-editing, if you're using Sublime Text and you really love the multi-cursors that are available in Sublime Text, that's what multi-editing will do for Visual Studio. So Web Essentials in 2015 does no longer carry the less compilers, the CoffeeScript compilers, all that sort of stuff. It's all gone. It was the #1 reason that Visual Studio was unstable, basically, was because that we carried all these node modules inside Web Essentials 2013, and it was not flexible enough. The problem is that Visual Studio cannot be as flexible when you just right-click something and say, compile this less file to CSS. That is not very flexible to the degree that we saw I could do with my gulp file. Right? So we ran the experiment for 2 years to see whether or not we could provide a less compiler sort of in the box with Web Essentials, and we can't. There's no way we can make it granular enough to the extent that so that everyone's happy. There's always going to be some scenarios where we can never do, and those scenarios are important. So grunt or gulp for compiling all that stuff is the way forward. I'm still looking at maybe there's another way we could play around with this so we don't need grunt and gulp, but it's by far the best and most flexible system that is out there today. I've used it for a couple of years, and I'm really, really happy using it. So I hope that I've demystified some of these node tools, and it looks less scary than at least when I started. I was like a little hesitant, but I hope that you see that this is not that big a thing, and it feels natural and it feels nice. There's a question, yeah? What about TypeScript support in Visual Studio? You still have TypeScript support. You can use Gulp and Grunt to compile TypeScript. So you can get the full CI server. You can have the exact same build system as the rest of your website by using Gulp. Yep.
What about the node modules directory? Character limitation?
Yeah, so, yes. What about the long path issues with node modules? Anyone here run into a node modules issue? So that is still there. I know that they're working on it. But the problem is, so let's to illustrate the issue, that node modules, like let's take Gulp. It contains node modules because it has dependencies. So here they are. Now let's look at this one. Not that one. This one. It has node modules, right? Because it's dependencies. And so this list can get very long because you have node modules inside node modules, inside node modules, inside node modules, and you hit the long path exception. So the way we can get around that is, let's just look here. We can go into our project from before. Let's say show all files here. Right-click node modules and click flatten packages. Are you sure you want to do this? Yep. And it runs. Again, flatten packages is a great name for something that flattens packages. And this extension will go through, it actually runs this through Node, so Node doesn't have an issue with long paths. So it should work fine. It can take a while depending on how much stuff we got in there. But if we look in there now, instead of having 3 things like gulp and gulpless and bin, we now have 120, 135, 139. It basically flattens the hierarchy, and then it deletes all the duplicates. So we get a smaller thing. So I hope that answers your question. This is a node module. You can run it on a CI server as well. It doesn't have to be from right-clicking inside Visual Studio. Question over here? If you do npm update, it only does that if you don't have the thing that you claim you do in your package.json. So it will, the next time if you delete your node modules folder and do npm install or save package.json file, you have to do this again. You can automate that though, so we'll do that for you. Question over here. Yes, great question. So I have a project already that uses a lot of these tools in a previous version of Visual Studio. Can I bring that forward into Visual Studio 2015 and work on them there with these new great capabilities? There definitely is. So we have round tripping. So anything you have, if your project can open in Visual Studio 2010 Service Pack 1, it's called round tripping. You can open it in Visual Studio 2015 without it destroying anything. So there are situations where you can't, but like if it's a web project or anything, no problem. Okay, and this works, all this tooling work in not just web projects, but in all sorts of projects. Like Cordova apps, for instance, it will work there. It will work on websites and old MVC solutions and all that sort of stuff. All right? Mm-hmm. So when you run, so package restore on a CI server works great for NuGet, but what about npm and Bower? How do they package restore? So if you can execute a command like whatever you use on your CI server, ms build for instance, if that's what you use, you can just do a PostScript build or something that's called, where you write npm install, and the next line Bower install, and that happens. It will do that. That's exactly what happens when you save package.json, is that command is fired. Just install Node.js, that's all you need, and then you can call these commands. And if you use ASP.NET 5, that's all built in. Right, so if you use ASP.NET 5, the restoring of all these packages happen automatically, including executing like a default gulp task if you want that. Yeah. Okay. What is this? Yes. Free upgrade. We love that. And finally, I will stick around. I'll be here all day. I'll be here the rest of the week. So if you have any questions, please come on up. Thank you very much for joining me, and have a great rest of the conference.